Okay.
And where are you based right now,
Delhi.
Satish? Okay.
We are
Delhi.
both in Delhi.
Okay.
Amrita, you're giving the count?
Started.
And
Hello and welcome to Outlook Talks. We have with us Subir Sinha, Director of SOAS, South Asian Institute, joining us from London. Thank you very much, Subir. Subir is has been a regular contributor to Outlook. His last piece on the diaspora, on the Indians living abroad in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere, made for very, very interesting reading. That's his domain. That's what he teaches. That's what he deals with. Thank you very much for joining us today, Subir.
thank you so much for having me on your show. It's always been a pleasure.
Great. And we have Outlook editor Chinky Sinha also joining us, to chat with Subir.
Hi.
Hello there, Chinky. Good to see you again.
Same here.
So, Subir, as we've been having this series of talks, so a long drawn election campaign has ended, and this long phases of election voting has ended now, and it's we are ready for the results. One thing that we all noticed, of course, quite evident, how much in the election campaigns the BJP and Mr. Modi talk about this India's image abroad.
Hmm.
That how India is this Vishwa Guru, how Mr. Modi has made Indians proud abroad. I know it's a very strong pitch that they have in most of their campaigns in far-flung places like Guntur, and I heard it in Guntur, in Andhra Pradesh, and so how important and how much do the voters believe this?
So, as you say, we hear this all the time from all corners in India, small town, large town, villages. And you do have people saying that, look, my own material conditions may not have improved too much, but I'm going to vote for Mr. Modi because इन्होंने हम भारत का डंका बजवाया है पूरे विश्व में, that apparent, and Mr. Modi himself cultivates that by saying, before I came in, people used to be ashamed of being identified as Indians, and we were ashamed of our customs and traditions abroad and things like that. And I can tell you that I've recently had a conversation with someone who has his own investment banking firm in London, and he was going to go back to vote in the elections on the sole question of what Mr. Modi's has done to India's image abroad. So,
Yes.
for this kind of thing to have the kind of hold that it does have among a certain set of voters, I'm not sure that all voters believe this or for whom this is the main reason for voting for the BJP. But clearly, it has a hold on some people's imagination. And I think it has a lot to do with what they know or remember about India's place in the world before 2014 and how susceptible they have been to all kinds of news coverage, but also WhatsApp forwards and things like that about the kind of power that Mr. Modi has. So if you go back to 2014, 2015, already by that kind of time, you had pictures floating on the early days of WhatsApp of all world leaders are bowing before Mr. Modi at some kind of a unspecified conference, and he's giving them advice and things like that. So from
Yeah.
that point onwards, the construction of Mr. Modi as a world leader has been, kind of ongoing. And then you sort of take a look at something that, again, a lot of people, who are kind of highly educated, etc., used to find a bit funny were those hugs with very tight hugs, one would even say undiplomatic hugs with world leaders. And I think, I've actually heard people say to me that that just shows how comfortable he is and how intimate he is with international leaders and so on. So again,
Yeah.
something that appears unseemly to some people appears like an
Yeah.
evidence of Mr. Modi fitting into the that kind of a platform. So,
But
you know, then we have, so photos matter a lot in conveying this
yeah.
particular kind of an
But
image.
Subir,
Hmm,
say one is the, as you said, the construct, the
hmm,
hype, that
hmm,
this is what we are and this is what where
hmm.
we were and how we have reached these heights, etc. But
Yeah.
two is the, for people like you who are abroad or for
Hmm,
people like who are in the US or other places,
hmm,
the reality of how much does India matter on the world stage, like say, in the say for in the Ukraine war,
hmm,
in the nuclear policy, in various other world issues.
hmm.
So don't they see this gap that of one being the hype, and actually what they really feel when say in say international papers headlines on world issues, does India ever count? Do they? So so this thing for people for whom it's a lived
Hmm,
experience, don't
hmm.
you think this gap between the hype and the reality sort of should should kind of register at some point?
Because these things have a degree of ambiguity about them, that is why this is you can basically have a polarizing effect on voters and on people generally. So, for example, the claim that he got the Ukraine war stopped for 3 days, okay,
Right.
on the one hand seems very absurd. On the other hand, you have statements from Zelensky and from Putin who say we would welcome Mr. Modi's intervention and he would be an important voice in the ending of the war there. So there is that whether so that's the kind of ambiguity. Or it is well known that in the case of Gaza, the official Indian position and the position of the BJP and the position of the BJP's trolls on Twitter
Yeah.
is a very different one. These are all three very different kinds of scenarios that are going on. But in the middle of that, you will have, firstly, of course, Mr. Modi said in one of his recent set piece interviews that how can people refer to me as anti-Muslim? मैंने तो रमजान के महीने में हमास के ऊपर attacks रुकवा दिए थे. I mean, this was not known to anyone. I don't know if this was known to Hamas itself. But then you also have statements coming from the Palestinian Authority saying India has been our historic friend and we would like to have a road that they should also come into the
Yeah.
picture. So, that kind of ambiguity is, I think, and I actually have said this in the past also, but I mean, ambiguity is a very strong weapon for Mr. Modi because when you are giving a number of highly contradictory statements, some of which might appear totally fantastical to the same group of people who are going to vote for you, and others within that same group accept that as absolute fact, then those who are not within that group of voters will look at this as contradiction, sometimes as foolish, and so on. But the thing is that it appeals to people or to some segment of the population. And it's a degree of cunning in terms of the deployment of these statements and images and things like that,
Mm.
which are entirely missed by some people. I mean, for example, the statement on Mans, Machli, etc. There's a
Yes.
very interesting piece in today's Independent where they have interviewed a bunch of people from UP, and this statement is coming in the quotations from ordinary voters. We
Yeah.
wanted to have a person as prime minister who did not eat mutton and fish. Okay, so I
Yeah.
mean,
But what the investment banker example that you started with, even
yes.
people like those are not able to quite discern this ambiguity.
No, so first of all, I have to say that I was quite shocked by that statement. Okay. I mean, I regularly come across people from the banking sector or from the city who tell me that they're not entirely, convinced by growth figures and they normally knock off 2 or 3%, but they'll also then go on to say all countries exaggerate their growth figures. We also knock off similarly for China and things like
Mm.
that. Okay. Does India figure too much in the conversations going on about world affairs as far as the British media is concerned? You won't find that that is the case in the main newspapers. You won't find that that is the case in the main television channels and things like that. And in fact, what you do find increasingly is that among the very strong support that Modi ji has among particularly Gujarati Hindus in the UK, So now it is very common. I would not be surprised that, for example, once this is people watch this, that letters will be written to my director asking them to fire me. So I mean, I was on a radio station for barely 4 minutes last week, speaking on something completely different to what this person then wrote me a 3.5 page long email,
Oh,
in which he said that I was anti-diaspora. Well, there was nothing about the diaspora. I was anti-Hindu. I suppose that is open to debate. I'm anti-Indian. That I would deny. And then it was copied to my director. It was copied to the Home Ministry. It was copied to the
wow.
Ministry of External Affairs. And it was copied to the High Commission of India, asking to investigate what I teach, what I write, and so on and so forth. So they are very concerned that any kind of questioning of the narrative of the greatness in international affairs of Modi and the elevation of India to the top table of international diplomacy and deal making, they don't want that to be questioned in any fundamental or serious way.
Okay, I had a question about this rise of right-wing leaders across
Hmm,
the world. Like, so you have these very charismatic leaders who
hmm,
talk really polarizing stuff sometimes, but
hmm,
it seems like, like, for example, Trump's popularity is also increasing again, and
hmm,
I'm not sure what's going on, how are they designing this campaign, and this whole thing about this world leader, that
hmm,
seems to be this new thing,
hmm,
because I've been having conversations with people, and
hmm,
they're thinking, no, but in India's position in the world, we are going to be a superpower.
hmm,
So they're not really able to, talk about facts or whatever numbers or anything like that. But there is
hmm,
this image of being, this in a very big way, like
hmm,
leading this world situation, and across. I mean, it's
hmm,
everywhere.
hmm,
Also, the whole thing of, Britain has Rishi Sunak, so there was
hmm,
this of Indian origin people, so
hmm,
there's this whole pride thing, I don't know what
hmm,
it is, but diaspora for me is very interesting because, I have a lot of my own family who live
hmm.
abroad, and their views are really different in terms of what we feel, so they feel this India is particularly, this superpower is a Hindu country, they're all, so where is all this coming from, and why diaspora is so like a lot of them, but what is this, and why does this image and this right wing?
So I think there are three questions, if I can put it
Yes,
that way. I mean, one of them is the overall rise of the global right, and then a subset of that is the role of religion within that.
yes.
Second is about the diaspora and, in some ways, a very disconnected view, for example, such as the one that you might hold, or many other people in India might hold with respect to India itself. Just to kind of take on the second one first with an example. We recently had a launch of a book in at SOAS that I chaired, and there were three other discussants. In fact, I think apart from the writer and I, the other two were not Indians. This was Alpa Shah's book on the Bhima Koregaon 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first question that came, well, it was not a question. The man just got up and he started saying very loudly, "We are coming back with 400 seats. You are all urban Naxals. I should report you." Okay. So we dealt with that. And, when the event got over, I was asking him, one of my friends who teaches economics at one of the other colleges and is a practicing Hindu, he went up and he said, "How many dhams have you visited? Aap kitne dham pe gaye hain?" And the man said, "Whoa, what are dhams? I've never heard of dhams. What are you saying?" And then the chap explained what dhams were. And then the second question I asked which was, when was the last time you went to India? And the man must have been around 60, and he had never been to India.
Wow.
And he was a Gujarati gentleman of Ugandan origin, via Uganda. Okay. So
Hmm.
you come across people like that, where the affiliation with India is well, basically with Modi, is extremely strong, despite having little or no, kind of family or histories of visits and things like that. So I
Hmm.
think with the diaspora, there is an imagination of an India with which they connect. And I think that is very much closely sort of focused on their place of origin. So again, someone that I work with and is a secular person, and so on. Family is from Gujarat, and I think he's been there. He went some months ago after a decade or 2 decades, and he came back very impressed with Gujarat and what was going on there and so on. And he asked me to forward him stuff that is critical of the Gujarat model of development and so on. But he was someone who's kind of wavering on that question of his affiliation or opposition to Hindutva. So that takes me, so you can see there's a major emotional connect that people have, and I think it's a void
Mm.
that it is
Yeah.
filling
And
for
if I
lack
may
of
just
belonging.
interject
Hmm, hmm,
just one thing, and
hmm,
they see, Subir, you're right. See,
hmm,
for a country which has
hmm.
been like for the last 2 decades now, almost growing at 6.5, 7%,
Yes.
if somebody comes after a gap of about 20 years, it is quite, things have improved. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a hell of a lot of development and various things have happened because of the sheer growth.
Yeah.
So that model, that whether it's
Hmm,
Gujarat or Kerala or Bihar, or from
hmm.
where the base was, so
Yeah.
that has, and so that is quite a, I mean, it's a real thing they see.
No,
Another
absolutely.
thing
And you see, hmm,
I
go
wanted
ahead,
to
please.
say also was this, this colonial thing, and I think you
Hmm,
should touch upon that because there's a lot
hmm,
of that conversation, in a way that, and
hmm.
there's more to that also in a reverse way going further. But there's this whole
Yeah.
reversing this colonial situation, because I was
Yes,
watching these
but
movies.
again, that is not so straightforward in the sense that if you
Yeah,
look at
exactly.
the,
Why?
I mean, a lot of the Hindutva people have moved over to voting for Rishi Sunak, and partly because of the Indian origin thing, but partly because of an overall sort of becoming wealthier of large chunks of the Indian diaspora, and therefore, obviously, wealthy people tend to prefer parties that are low on taxes, which the Tories are.
Hmm.
So, they've actually moved in that particular direction, and strangely enough, or not strangely enough, it is the Conservative Party which still remains the most unapologetically pro-colonialism and pro-empire.
Yeah.
So they are sort of having a foot, kind of a, foot in both camps. But on the emotional side of things, I think that has a lot to do in terms of explaining your first question, which is the rise of the right all across the world and the rise of religion within the rise of the right. So you asked one question about why world leaders, and I think, there is.
Situation.
So, I mean, I think one issue is that, there is what we in our technical jargon call polycrisis, which is that there are multiple crises which are going on, which are global in scale, and that can only be resolved
Yeah.
at a global. Right. So,
Mm.
you've had a collapse of US hegemony in the world. You have had a collapse of the kind of liberal democratic model because partly of the fact that through these democratic models only many of the far right people got elected and came to office.
Yeah.
And you see, the thing is that everywhere there are so some dimensions which work out quite well for the non-Indian right wing, though also the Indian right wing participates in that. Anti-immigration, vilification of Muslims, that's, I think, a global phenomenon. That's not just something restricted to India. You can see that in the case of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, or the rise of the AFD in Germany, and the American sort of MAGA far right and things like that. So the connection with rise of religion and the rise of some leaders such as Mr. Modi, but not only him,
Yeah.
is a kind of a recognition, maybe not fully expressed as such, of the that everyone is aware that the problems are global in nature, whether it is the very fragile nature of capitalism today, or climate change, or wars that seem to be going on without end, or the loss of cultural and national identity as imagined due to the fact that large numbers of people from other parts of the world have come through. And so you kind of look at the porosity of borders, and that is another sort of indication that the post-war world order, which was based upon nation states that had borders and that were controlling movements across borders, that people have lost control over this kind of thing. People are just coming through the walls of the south of the US, or they're taking the small boats from Europe to England, and sometimes they come into very small towns in large numbers. So visually, to go back to Satish's very good point about visual change, A
Hmm.
town that might look entirely white 15 odd years ago and now is looking like, 40-50% not white, and it doesn't look English because the shops have Polish
Yeah.
signs. So the rate and quantum of change is quite rapid, and not everyone is fully happy or able to deal with that, because they have a sense of uh, cultural nationalism that I unfortunately don't have. So I don't fully understand how
Hmm.
solidarity with a fellow human being is less important than some kind of a notion of the border. But the crises are very large. And the final point I want to make here is that the use of social media platforms, apps, meme culture, which the facility with which anyone can morph or fake an image or a video, all of these basically have elevated this whole situation. But I think Mr. Modi is singular in the sense that whereas in Turkey or in the US or in the case of Russia, the church or the clergy, etc., have played a very major role, let us recognize that that is not a universal scenario. We don't have that sort of a Christian fundamentalism in the UK so much, or in large parts of Europe. Mr. Modi is singular because he projects himself as a living God
Yes.
and is accepted by many as a living God. And I think
Yeah.
that is, in one way, a very
In
unique characteristic of the rise of the religious far right
in fact, this gentleman that you were talking about, who is about 60 and who's actually never been to India,
Hmm,
and he's objecting to a book being discussed about
hmm.
human rights, for instance. So that his image of this India is it's entirely virtual,
Entirely
isn't it? I
virtual.
mean,
Hmm.
it's
That
only through, yeah, it's only through what he's seen on WhatsApp, on social media, on
Hmm.
television. So it's that universe.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
you can't even call it nostalgic because he has nothing around which he can have that
Yeah,
nostalgia. He has had
correct.
no experience of being to India, so he cannot be nostalgic about India. But as a state of mind, it exists and it influences him so firmly
Right.
that he is willing to, kind of effectively make a fool of himself and have security called on him for disrupting an event.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, towards the end of the evening, we had a very nice conversation. I offered him something to drink, and he said he was not alcoholic, so he chose orange juice, and
Okay.
then gave us a book on
Yeah. I mean,
Hindu
see,
culture.
as long as it ends that way, even now it's fine. It's
No, no, I
I
said,
mean,
please, we've added him to our mailing list, so I expect to see
yeah,
him in some future event at at my college.
Correct.
great.
Another, this one thing, I mean, I was watching these, I watch a lot of memes just to get a
Hmm,
feel of what is going on.
hmm,
There was one meme in particular, I remember, and there was this young guy, okay, I
hmm,
think from Bihar or UP, I'm not too sure, but this one guy, this is exactly what he said. He said, पहले अमेरिका हमको बोलता था तुम क्या चीज हो और
hmm,
आज हम उसको बोलते हैं कि तू क्या है बे,
hmm.
that
Ha,
kind.
ha, ha.
It's like anger, it's like kind of like this conquering that thing, which was like, why does America's image matter so much, in terms of like, America's image rather like perception, so there's this, and how does it translate into in terms of voting, and what is the Congress thing also? Like, for example, other parties in India, and Congress obviously the main opposition party.
Hmm, hmm,
Nehru also was a
hmm,
leader who did certain things, and those kind of have been challenged, forgotten,
hmm,
kind of critiqued also for good
hmm,
reasons
hmm.
and sometimes bad reasons as well. But what is this whole memory? This thing. What is going on?
So, see, I mean, one part of the whole memory question is the forgetting question.
Yes.
And there is a very a kind of a long-term effort for a cultivated amnesia with respect to what India was in the world before 2014. So, for
Yes.
example, just imagine how much time and money must have gone into knocking Nehru's image from that of a well-renowned, sort of statesman to basically a philandering loser, which has been the image that were,
Yeah.
widely sort of
Quite,
circulated and
yes, yes,
accepted.
quite successfully done. Yeah.
Totally. So, that is one part. Second part is most Indians have not been abroad. So therefore, most Indians do not have any direct experience of what it was like to go abroad before 2014.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a feeling that we were humiliated. So, remember, there's a lot of comments made by Modi regarding this. Around Manmohan Singh, he said in 2013, okay, something along the lines कि नवाज शरीफ ने उनको एक देहाती औरत बोला था. Okay. How can the Prime Minister of India be referred to as a dehati aurat? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, Modi gave a speech in Canada in 2015, I believe, where he said something along the lines that I used to be ashamed of being called an Indian, when I used to be outside of the country and things like that. Okay. So, I've been outside of the country for a very long time. I've never been made to feel, humiliated for being an Indian or a person of Indian origin. I'm sure that Indians have faced racism and racist comments, so
Of course.
there must be that. So
Yeah.
first you've
So with
cultivated
India,
amnesia, then you've cultivated a sense of being ashamed. And then on top of that, you can graft onto that sense of shame a sense of pride that is entirely due to Modi coming to power in
and
2014.
this another thing, and you are in the UK, probably you can explain.
Mm.
There was this thing called Oxford Commons or something a
Huh.
few weeks
What
ago.
about it?
Yeah, so there was this whole thing about, you go to the immigration counter in the UK, and the lady is very impressed because I'm from India. So,
Huh.
so these
Oh,
statements
the
by,
Sudha Murthy one.
yeah.
No, yeah, yeah. I've read that also in relation to Sudha Murthy, that they sort of were
Yeah, so
amazed that.
what I find it very interesting is, why does it matter whether the immigration lady is looking at you, whichever way? I mean, I'm sorry, but like, so if you would explain to us in terms
Mm,
of this Indian going abroad and the abroad people getting really impressed that you're from India and that you've come a long way and you're a superpower, what does it signal in terms of the larger politics, in terms of nationalism, in terms of everything else? This is something that we have been hearing regularly also in schools in India, some of the schools.
mm,
And I mean, I won't take names, but
mm,
there's a young girl like 6 7 years old, and I was on the phone with her, and she's like, Modi ji is saving the world.
mm,
And this is and she's like, I don't want to hear anything against this, but Modi ji is saving the world. Now this world question, this
mm.
immigration counter question, there are these like these points,
But see,
so
the immigration counter issue is a very interesting one, because what
yeah,
is an immigration officer all about? An immigration officer is about waiting in front, well, he's sitting in front or she's sitting in front of a very long queue at Heathrow, wedge
Yeah.
is sneaking its way through with 400 to 500 people of all kinds of countries. And as you might know, a lot of flights that come from India are kind of scheduled around the same time as flights from different African countries and flights from China. So
yeah,
you're actually you're standing in line with people from Nigeria or wherever, and you think that they're inferior to you because you're Indian and Hindu and things like that.
yeah,
Yeah, and then when you come up to the top of the queue, the immigration officer has the powers to let you through, or if there are some reasons, or sometimes no reason, they can actually refuse you entry. Okay.
yeah.
So if the immigration, so you've reached the immigration officer, and then they say, "Oh my God, you're from India, please just walk through."
Mhm.
Then you're better off than this, many people from Nigeria or other countries in Africa who are being made to stand and their babies are shrieking and all that sort of thing. So that is actually a point at which you can feel that.
Yeah.
So the whole
Important.
story is really about how you are better off than other people of other national origins. Of course, it is, if you come to Heathrow, more than half of the immigration officers now are of Indian origin, possibly even of Punjabi origin. So the whole thing, but I think in the story, the immigration officer is actually supposed to be a white person. Okay, it's not specified.
Or it
Because if
assumes
it was
that
a
the white
Punjabi person saying, "Arey, aap to Hindustan se aaye hain, please come through,"
That
versus a
he'll
white
be
person
most
saying,
happy. Yeah.
so the whole sort of weight of the story is kind of different from that point of view. But why the world? Because I mean, now we experience the world on a very daily basis. I think apps and phones and circulation of material makes the world far more experienceable, even though in a superficial way, than was the case before. And remember, with this kind of especially social media, you don't like Biden, you go and give a gali to Biden on Twitter. You want to affiliate yourself with the Israeli Defense Forces. You create some, cruel joke about Palestinian children. So, at one level, these technologies and our practices of using them, they have not only made us experience a particular kind of world, but also it tells us that we can participate in a global conversation by making allies with or becoming inimical to some other right-wing person. So, if you look at your own WhatsApp groups and things like that, you will find that there's a lot of material pertaining to Israel,
Yeah.
Putin. Yeah. So, then there are people who in the BJP will be connected to the British far right people like Tommy Robinson. I mean, you can see, messages coming from Op India editors saying, "Hello, Tommy, we are with you," or whatever, or Geert Wilders and one of the two Nupur Sharmas. So, all of these things are actually ways to experience the world. And the app gives you a kind of a mechanism to intervene. You think that you're intervening in a global
What
conversation.
sense of power?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So the
in fact
false
it's a
sense
bit
of
of a
power
reverse.
carries from as an
Yeah.
individual to the nation state, is what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say.
In fact, it is a bit of a reverse of this gentleman. To come back to him, he's living in his virtual world there, and this is
Yes.
a virtual world on this side.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, I fully agree. And basically, I mean, in some other writing, I've basically suggested that, I mean, at one level, we are now, all of us are agents of international relations. And
Exactly.
it is quite possible for me in a London bus to sit next to a person who might be African origin and has a hijab on, and she is looking at, it could be the Sudanese currency value, it could be a video from Egypt or whatever, yes,
Hmm.
while I am checking out Outlook's feed on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are sitting on the same public transport, yes, moving in some kind of direction. And it's the condition of the global city at the moment, that
True.
in global cities or in around the world, and I don't want to make it just about places like London. I've actually come across very interesting scenarios in very small towns in Latin America and things like that, where people have a notion of India. Like in a very small town in Argentina, there were two Indian vegetarian restaurants and a yoga studio, and the food was actually quite okay. The lady had spent
Wow.
lots of time in some,
I think yoga is another
yeah, yeah,
global,
yeah.
Yeah.
But
thing
yoga
that
is not as big as people make it out to be, in the sense that not everyone on the streets of the world is going around doing yoga. But
yeah,
obviously, with the UN having accepted that as a thing for which there is an international day, I mean, I
Yeah.
can't object to that. I'm sure yoga is good for many people. And in my where I live in neighborhood, there must be 15 yoga studios, primarily for white, mostly housewives, or people who are going through childbirth or something like that. So yoga has kind of entered popular culture, but that's been the case at least since the Beatles in the 1960s.
yeah.
So again, that is not something which is that new. But of course, the World Yoga Day is very new, and I get amused by looking at video clips of prominent BJP leaders trying to do yoga. Um, but yeah, I mean, Indian curry or yoga, those things have always been kind of cliched, items of Indian culture becoming part of global culture. But I think with the ubiquity of the telephone, the mobile phone, and the social media app, and
Absolutely.
with Indians wanting to, you won't find people from Brazil or Uruguay saying all of these things because they don't have the great power fantasy. But we have been fed into this idea of a great power fantasy, and I think,
Why do we buy this? Like, why, as people in India,
hmm,
why are we so hung up on this world thing? And, we are becoming this thing. Like, what is, I mean, I'm very curious about this. Why, as people, we are so concerned? And why has it become like an election narrative, for instance? Because for the last few years, we've heard a lot about India on the world stage. The G20 meet happened over here, all kinds of leaders that came in. Suddenly there's a lot of this foreign conversation, foreign related conversation, even in the election campaigns. And
hmm,
even when you go to a voter, let's say,
hmm.
a lot of them will talk about this and not knowing anything. So what is with us as people?
Well, there's something with us there's something about us as a people, there's something about where the world is right now, but also there is maybe like a third element in, all of this, which is that, there's been a lot of talk about civilizational states, right?
Yeah.
And if you think, I mean, I find that to be not convincing in the least, I have to say, okay? These are in some ways contradictory concepts. Civilization does not reside in a state. But if you look at the idea of the civilizational state, you find that there are 4 or 5 countries which are vying for that recognition. The Chinese are one, the Turks are another, the Russians, Iranians, and us. So there is a kind of an element that, we had massive past, glory, and somehow we lost it, and now we are going to recapture it. So
Yeah.
the idea of a civilizational state, simply put, Akhand Bharat, but also its other, diaspora, spread of yoga, all of those things, they find that this is something that convinces them that our power as a nation state should not be restricted to the borders of the nation state, and we should therefore have, okay. The second is just the working out of certain things that don't really have much to do with government at all. So when you talk about the G20, all of us know it goes by rotation.
Yeah.
And you don't have to move a finger really to get your G20 hosting
Yeah, you
opportunity.
just wait for your turn.
You just
Yeah,
wait for
but
your turn.
the
But
perception
then,
that was like that we got it. This,
Yes.
hmm,
they did a whole thing in Kashmir also, which was another. It's all very interesting in a way that they connect and the
Yeah.
strategic ways that it is being employed. It's quite fascinating actually to look at how they are doing it
hmm.
also. And there's a lot to
Absolutely.
learn from that
And
actually,
how it's
because
working.
clearly other parties have not done that. Because it's so interesting, it's so fascinating that you take the delegation to Kashmir,
Yeah.
smart city project over there. Kashmir is the contentious, like there's all this debate, but you have so what?
And that's the third thing, which is how much PR and marketing and communication
Yeah,
has become a part of what state power should be about under Modi
Absolutely.
2014. Okay, I mean, the centrality of PR and of communication and the photographic image, these are, I think, very novel
Yeah.
features of Indian
In fact,
politics.
yeah, I mean, it's a trick that the opposition has missed completely.
completely.
But the thing is, you have to get state power to be able to play to play some of these tricks. Okay, so
Some of
that.
it, but
It's so
even
okay.
otherwise, with there are a lot of ways to do it. Even otherwise, in this
Hmm,
make believe universe that we are
huh,
talking about,
hmm,
there
Yeah,
the entry levels are not that high.
hmm. No,
You
I
just
agree. Like, for
maybe
example, some of the
just for how
questions in
attentive
some
your
of the
candidate.
interviews that have happened in the last few weeks involving me, you've had sort of questions starting off saying, Mr. Modi, as a world leader who is expecting to get, who we expect will get more than 400 seats. I mean, that is a kind of projection of a particular
Yeah,
party fantasy into the common sense of a global media elite. And they really work pretty hard at that. So, for example, we now can see that the BBC here is far more deferential to the BJP and the government in India than was the case even 2 years ago. And of course, they were chastened with all the raids and things like that. So they've
also.
used all the levers of power. And I think, when I say that you have to have state power in hand to be able to do some of these things. I mean, we know that the PR budget for the government has been very massive, and I think historical in terms of, I
yeah,
mean, by far, I would say. You can now also see that many of the prominent Indian embassies and high commissions have, as far as I'm aware, people who have come from the Sangh on diplomatic kinds of, postings. If you look at some of the people who were platformed by the Indian High Commission here at the Nehru Center, this might involve people like Vivek Agnihotri or many others quite openly affiliated with the government, and in some ways maybe even to the further right of the government. These are projections. We find that, for example, Sadhvi Ditambara was going to come here to give speeches. Who would have organized her tour? Dhirendra Shastri ji came and he gave, pravachans all across the UK. You can find, though I think Sadhguru is still recovering from his illness, but you could have found posters of inner engineering courses for only
Yeah.
£600 per session, etc., on the London Underground. So there's a lot of that sort of thing going on, which is kind of partly state, partly non-state, partly
Yeah.
voluntary. Yeah.
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 And one other thing was that this. whole thing, this PR communication campaign, and when we're
mm,
talking about the other parties, there was this whole thing beach me about Nehru sending his clothes to Paris or wherever to get them dry cleaned. Now,
yeah.
see, that's one other example of kind of like using
Yeah.
that. I don't know what is the truth, whether Nehru sent it or didn't send it, but like I have seen this people in Bihar also talking about this. अरे नेहरू जी तो वहां कपड़े भेजते थे, यहाँ कपड़े नहीं धोते.
हाँ हाँ,
Yeah.
बट ये बहुत पुरानी बात है, नेहरू
Yeah, exactly. But
सेंडिंग,
no,
हाँ,
it's
ये तो
been coming back.
2013-14 से ये चालू हुआ था, अबाउट नेहरू सेंडिंग क्लोथ.
Yeah.
You have another one that once he went to Satara or someplace and realized that he had left his cigarettes behind in Delhi. And so he sent a plane back to Delhi to pick up his cigarettes because he smoked such expensive cigarettes
Oh,
that
I had
they
no
were
idea
not
about him.
available locally. So, you've got, yeah, you've got that kind of a, that's what I'm saying. You've got to first destroy the full image. And
Yeah.
by the way, in Pakistan, the story is that Jinnah used to send a plane to London to pick up ham for his ham sandwiches. So,
Exactly.
so stories about people like that, which can be fully, debunked. And as far as I'm aware, the story of the laundry actually comes from some book by an RSS person, and that also he says it was reported that. Okay, so वो अय्याश नेहरू का जो
But look at
इमेज है.
how much it has spread.
हाँ,
Like,
बिल्कुल.
like, you
But
know,
this that has to me a very that is to me a very, very fascinating thing,
me too,
which
yeah.
is that if you want to elevate yourself as the preeminent figure of post-independence Indian politics, then so not only are you putting yourself up, you've got to put the other fellow
Yes.
down, so
Correct.
And
that the
the
gap,
That's
second,
true.
as the other guy
international
goes
thing.
down, you go up, and
Yeah.
the gap is the measure of your greatness in comparison
No,
against him.
and the recent one was about Gandhi, for instance, that
Yeah.
nobody knew Gandhi before that film came out. And that's also very fascinating in terms of, if you look at these election speeches,
Mm,
and, on the one hand, the opposition has like really been, I don't know what trip they are on, but they have not talked about this international or anything like that. They're not
mm,
world leader or anything,
mm.
except the left party, which had put Israel as their first thing on the manifesto.
Yeah.
But this whole thing about Gandhi, for instance,
Mm.
now that is also very interesting in terms of understanding how this narrative works, So, and maybe if you have any thoughts on that, because that just came recently,
Yeah, I
So
mean, if you just think about that particular statement and in that interview, when he says, I mean, no one knew Gandhi. I mean, as it turns out, he threw a lot of very funny memes, no one
Yeah.
knew Rajma Chawal before Mr. Bean cartoons, for example. That was
और
one.
राम तेरी गंगा मैली हो गई कि पहले गंगा जी कोई नहीं
Ha, exactly. So, so I
जानता.
mean, again, it's a clever ploy in a clever use of a particular kind of narrative. So, what does he do with that? Gandhiji is forgotten. Yeah. So, I mean, the only way you can sort of go back to Gandhi is Modi bringing him back through some kind of an effort. That also shows badly on the opposition. Ki bhai, you are the ones who call yourself Gandhians and you've let him, down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically, so it's a way in which you could actually relegate Gandhi to completely as a museum piece, right? You can basically say that there is no relevance of Gandhi in today's life or in politics or whatever. He's someone who had become so obscure that a film by a white person basically brought him back into public consciousness. And government should kind of do a little bit more. So, I mean, as you enter Delhi airport, I think domestic counter, the domestic terminal, and you
Yeah.
see that massive charkha, okay,
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is completely the opposite of what a charkha and a Gandhian charkha is supposed to be. But maybe that is the only way in a contemporary time that Gandhi can
Mm.
be memorialized is by that really awful large charkha in front of the airport, or the conversion of Sabarmati ashram to a kind of an air-conditioned location where foreign heads of state can be brought in. So Gandhi has
Mm.
been fully evacuated of any significance except as a logo on Swachh Bharat or as a charkha in front
Yeah.
of the airport and so forth, none of which are Gandhian in the least.
No, but internationally, Gandhi was there. Nelson Mandela, all these people talk about Gandhi. In fact,
हाँ हाँ
Michael
बिल्कुल. I
Jackson
mean,
also.
you see, just behind my college is the place which is called Tavistock Square, where the
Mhm.
Gandhi statue is, which is where the Prime Minister or the Indian High Commissioner and things like that will come and put garlands on different sort of occasions. But if you go there, you'll find many people who are non-Indians who are getting their pictures taken with that and so forth. And I mean, I teach, Gandhi. That course actually also has Savarkar in that, as it turns out. But you can see that there are students who are coming from Africa who are very impressed by that.
Yeah.
You know that, there was a movement to bring down Gandhian statues in Africa, but 100% of my African students, oppose those kinds of moves, and they are proud of the fact that there was a time when Indian, African, Latin American, Middle Eastern, Chinese, leaders and people of the ex-colonized world thought of having something in common.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Subir. It's been a really interesting conversation, but I think we have exceeded our time limit by a lot. I mean,
Oh
unfortunately,
God, I have another
we have
meeting.
to
Yeah.
end this. We
Thanks
have to
very
end
much.
it
Do
here,
send
but
me a link, please.
yeah, sure. But we have to
Okay.
end here. But thank you so much. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much
Likewise for
for
me.
joining in from London. Thank you so much, Chinky. Really,
So,
I think it was a very informal and a invigorating conversation. Thank you.
yeah,
Thanks,
thank you so much,
Satish and
Subir. Thank
Chinky.
you,
Take care.
Satish.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.